What if patience is not passive endurance, but an intimate conversation between the servant and the divine where every wound becomes a doorway to nearness? In Surah Al-Anbiya, the story of Prophet Ayyub as is often read as the ultimate test of suffering, but Ibn Arabi invites us to see something far deeper, a spiritual refinement where pain itself becomes worship, and patience becomes a form of unveiled knowledge. In Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah presents Prophet Ayyub not as a man defined by loss, but as a soul refined by remembrance. His body was afflicted, his wealth removed, his companions distanced, yet the Quran records his words with extraordinary restraint. Indeed, adversity has touched me, and you are the most merciful of the merciful. Ibn Arabi pauses here not on the sickness, but on the language. Ayyub does not accuse, complain, or even demand. He simply bears witness to reality, affirming divine mercy. For Ibn Arabi, this is not ordinary patience. This is Sabr, as Marifa, patience born from deep knowing. True patience, in his vision, is not silence forced by helplessness, but serenity rising from recognition. Ayyub recognizes that every state, whether ease or affliction, arrives from the same divine hand. When the source is one, how can the heart object to the form? Ibn Arabi teaches that trials are not punishments, but disclosures. They reveal to the servant what was hidden in comfort. Ease often veils us with gratitude that is habitual, but hardship strips the soul down to its core. In that bareness, the servant meets God without intermediaries. Ayyub's trial was not meant to break him, it was meant to empty him of all reliance except Allah. Notice how Ayyub's prayer contains no request for healing. Ibn Arabi points out that this is the etiquette of the realized ones. They do not instruct God how to act, they present their state and leave the response to divine wisdom. This is why Ayyub's patience is active, alive, and luminous. His suffering speaks, but it speaks Tawhid. According to Ibn Arabi, every human being lives through cycles of manifestation and concealment, health and illness, wealth and poverty, honor and obscurity. Each is a veil through which Allah reveals himself differently. Ayyub understood this cosmic rhythm. When health was taken, he did not feel abandoned. He recognized a new divine name revealing itself, Al-Qabid, the withholder, just as before he had known Al-Basit, the expander. This understanding transforms suffering. Pain no longer asks, "Why me?" Instead, it whispers, "What is being shown to me now?" Ibn Arabi would say that Ayyub's body suffered, but his heart remained in witnessing. The trial did not reduce him, it clarified him. His patience was not resistance to pain, but harmony with divine decree. Ibn Arabi also highlights a subtle mercy in the story. Ayyub's suffering did not turn him inward in ego, but outward in compassion. Those who suffer deeply often become mirrors of mercy. They recognize pain in others because they have hosted it themselves. Thus, Ayyub becomes not only a prophet of patience, but a teacher of gentleness. His endurance is not harsh, it is tender. When Allah restores Ayyub, Ibn Arabi reminds us that restoration is not the reward, it is the continuation of mercy. Healing is not proof of success, nor is suffering proof of failure. Both are garments, and the wise do not confuse the garment with the wearer. Ayyub's rank did not rise because he was healed. It was already elevated because he never lost presence. For Ibn Arabi, the greatest lesson here is that patience is not waiting for the storm to pass. Patience is remaining with Allah inside the storm. Many endure hardship, but few remain conscious within it. Ayyub remained. His body spoke pain, but his heart spoke intimacy. This is why Allah praises him not for surviving the trial, but for being an excellent servant throughout it. In our own lives, we often seek meaning after relief comes. Ibn Arabi teaches us to seek meaning during the trial. If Ayyub could witness mercy while his body was broken, then perhaps our own wounds are not signs of distance, but invitations to deeper nearness. True patience, then, is not the absence of tears. It is the absence of inner objection. It is trusting that the same hand that tests is the hand that heals, and the same silence that hurts is also listening. And in that knowing, the soul rests even while the body aches. Ibn Arabi approaches patience not as a virtue of suppression, but as a state of awakened perception. In the story of Prophet Ayyub, patience does not appear as clenched endurance or forced silence. It manifests as clarity of vision. When Ayyub is afflicted, stripped of health, strength, and outward dignity, he does not argue with destiny because he recognizes the one who is acting through it. For Ibn Arabi, this recognition is the essence of Sabr. The heart that knows the source no longer rebels against the form. Most people imagine patience as something that happens when the self has no choice left, a quiet suffering born from helplessness. Ibn Arabi dismantles this idea entirely. He teaches that true patience only appears when the soul is free, when it could object, complain, or despair, yet chooses presence instead. Ayyub's restraint was not weakness, it was sovereignty of the heart. His inner sight was stronger than the pain of his body, and that sight prevented him from turning suffering into separation. In Surah Al-Anbiya, Ayyub's words are remarkably minimal. He does not list his losses or explain his pain. He simply acknowledges that harm has touched him and immediately affirms divine mercy. Ibn Arabi sees this as spiritual etiquette. The knower of God does not dramatize his wounds before the divine, because he understands that nothing is hidden from the one who tests. By naming mercy alongside affliction, Ayyub demonstrates that his recognition of God remains intact despite the collapse of his physical state. For Ibn Arabi, patience emerges when the servant understands that every state arrives from a single will, health and illness, expansion and contraction, honor and humiliation are not random opposites, they are movements of the same reality expressing itself in different forms. When this truth settles in the heart, resistance loses its grip. The soul no longer asks why suffering has come, because it sees suffering as a messenger rather than an enemy. Ayyub's patience flows from this unified vision. This is why Ibn Arabi insists that Sabr is not passive, it is an active witnessing of divine action in real time. Ayyub's body experienced pain, but his heart remained attentive. He did not disconnect from God while waiting for relief. He stayed engaged, conscious, and inwardly still. This kind of patience requires immense awareness, because it asks the servant to remain present in discomfort without allowing the ego to claim injustice or abandonment. Ibn Arabi also explains that complaint itself is not always verbal. Inner objection, silent resentment, and the feeling that one has been wronged by destiny all fracture patience at its root. Ayyub was protected from this inner fracture because his knowledge of God was not theoretical. He did not merely believe that God is merciful. He recognized mercy even when it was hidden beneath pain. This recognition transformed affliction into intimacy rather than distance. Through Ayyub, Ibn Arabi teaches that patience is inseparable from Tawhid. The more fragmented one's vision of reality, the heavier suffering becomes. When events are seen as disconnected, the self feels attacked. But when everything is traced back to a single source, suffering loses its power to create alienation. Ayyub did not see illness separate from God. He saw it as a mode of divine address, speaking in a language that only the patient heart can understand. Ibn Arabi would say that patience matures when the servant stops measuring spiritual worth by external conditions. Ayyub's rank was not lowered by illness nor raised by healing. His station was preserved because his recognition did not fluctuate with circumstances. This is the hidden strength of Sabr. It stabilizes the heart when the world collapses. The patient one is not the one who feels the least pain, but the one whose relationship with God remains unbroken by it. In this light, patience becomes a form of worship that unfolds in silence and awareness rather than in visible action. It is a continuous yes to divine wisdom, even when that wisdom arrives wrapped in difficulty. Ayyub's story, as Ibn Arabi reads it, is not about surviving suffering but about seeing through it, allowing the heart to rest in recognition while the body endures the weight of trial. Ibn Arabi views trials not as signs of divine displeasure, but as moments of unveiling. in which hidden dimensions of reality come into view. In the story of Prophet Ayyub, suffering is not a negation of divine care, it is a shift in how that care is expressed. Ease and hardship are not opposites in Ibn Arabi's metaphysics, they are complementary movements through which the divine discloses different names. Ayyub's life becomes a living mirror of this truth as his state moves from abundance to deprivation without his end. Our orientation changing. Before the trial, Ayyub experienced the manifestation of divine generosity, expansion, hand protection, health, wealth, and respect reflected names such as Al-Rahman and Al-Basit. When these were withdrawn, it was not because mercy had vanished, but because mercy had changed its form. Ibn Arabi emphasizes that the divine never ceases to reveal itself, only the mode of revelation shifts. Illness and loss are not empty absences, but full presences of other names waiting to be recognized. In this reading, hardship becomes meaningful only when the servant understands that God is known through contrast. If there were no constriction, expansion would be invisible. If there were no fragility, strength would remain abstract. Ayyub's illness exposed him to names such as Al-Qabid, the withholder, and Al-Hakim, the wise. These names are often harder to love, but they are no less divine. Ibn Arabi suggests that spiritual maturity lies in recognizing God not only where comfort exists, but where the ego feels unknown. Ayyub's greatness, therefore, does not lie in the absence of suffering, but in his capacity to witness the divine behind it. He did not interpret loss as abandonment. Instead, he perceived it as a reconfiguration of divine proximity. Ibn Arabi teaches that when one form of divine self-disclosure recedes, another emerges, and a realized servant learns to read both with equal reverence. This is why Ayyub's heart did not collapse when his world did. Trials, in Ibn Arabi's thought, function as spiritual instruments that refine perception. Comfort often reinforces the illusion of control and independence. Hardship dismantles these illusions by revealing the servant's true dependence. Ayyub's trial stripped him of every external support until nothing remained but his relationship with God. In that exposure, the servant encounters a deeper intimacy. Because nothing distracts from the source, the unveiling is not in the pain itself, but in what the pain removes. Ibn Arabi also notes that the divine names revealed in hardship often work invisibly. Healing is immediate and noticeable, but wisdom and patience unfold quietly. Ayyub's endurance allowed names like Al-Sabr, the patient, and Al-Latif, the subtle, to manifest through him, rather than merely upon him. The servant becomes a site of divine disclosure, embodying attributes that cannot appear without resistance and time. This understanding transforms the meaning of prayer. Ayyub did not ask for suffering to end as a demand, because he understood that the trial was purposeful. His supplication was not an attempt to escape unveiling, but a surrender within it. Ibn Arabi explains that when a servant recognizes which divine name is active in a given moment, his prayer aligns with wisdom rather than impulse. This alignment preserves spiritual balance even in extreme conditions. For Ibn Arabi, the danger of suffering lies not in pain, but in misinterpretation. When hardship is seen as meaningless, it fractures faith. When it is seen as divine disclosure, it deepens awareness. Ayyub's story teaches that every trial carries a specific knowledge that cannot be accessed through ease. The soul that refuses to read this knowledge remains veiled, while the soul that accepts it becomes illuminated from within. The restoration of Ayyub's health, in Ibn Arabi's view, does not negate the trial's value, it confirms it. Healing arrives not as a reward for endurance, but as another unveiling, a return to expansion after contraction. The servant who has witnessed both states understands that neither defines God nor the self. Both are transient expressions of a reality that remains constant beneath change. Through Ayyub, Ibn Arabi invites the seeker to stop asking whether a trial is good or bad and to begin asking what is being revealed through it. Every difficulty carries a divine signature, and every loss removes a veil that comfort might have preserved. The one who learns to read these signatures discovers that suffering is not the opposite of mercy, but one of its most demanding and transformative forms. Ibn Arabi places the highest spiritual emphasis not on the removal of hardship, but on the quality of awareness that exists while hardship remains. In the story of Prophet Ayyub, the real miracle is not the return of health, but the uninterrupted presence of God in the heart of the servant during prolonged suffering. Many people remember God intensely when pain begins and thank Him when it ends, but very few remain consciously connected in the long, silent stretch in between. Ayyub remained. For Ibn Arabi, presence with God is not a feeling that comes and goes. It is a state of witnessing that stabilizes the heart regardless of circumstances. Ayyub's body deteriorated. His social standing collapsed and his isolation increased, yet his inward orientation did not fracture. This constancy is what elevates him beyond ordinary patience. He did not postpone faith until relief arrived. He lived faith inside affliction, allowing awareness to deepen rather than contract. Ibn Arabi teaches that trials expose the difference between remembrance that depends on comfort and remembrance that survives discomfort. When ease disappears, many forms of worship lose their sweetness. What remains is the raw relationship between servant and Lord. Ayyub's story illustrates this stripping away. His presence with God was no longer supported by external blessings. It stood alone, unsupported, and therefore purified. In this sense, the trial did not distract him from God. It removed everything that was not God. Remaining present during suffering requires a particular inner discipline. The ego naturally seeks meaning through escape, relief, explanation, or comparison. Ibn Arabi explains that true presence is maintained when the servant resists these distractions and stays attentive to the moment as it unfolds. Ayyub did not obsess over the duration of his illness or speculate about its cause. He remained grounded in the now, where divine nearness is always available, even when comfort is not. This presence transforms suffering from a psychological burden into a spiritual field. Pain continues, but it no longer defines identity. Ibn Arabi emphasizes that Ayyub did not become his illness. His sense of self remained anchored in servanthood, not in condition. By refusing to let hardship rename him, he preserved inner freedom. The trial occupied his body, but it did not colonize his heart. Ibn Arabi also highlights that presence during hardship is an act of trust deeper than hope. Hope looks toward a future change, while presence accepts the current state without abandoning the relationship. Ayyub's prayer reflects this maturity. He speaks from within the trial, not from a place of escape. His words are not fueled by desperation, but by intimacy. This shows that presence is not passive acceptance, it is active companionship with the divine in difficulty. The Quranic praise of Ayyub as excellent servant, according to Ibn Arabi, is directly tied to this quality. Excellence is not defined by outcome, but by orientation. Many endure suffering, few endure it without losing awareness. Ayyub's excellence lies in his refusal to let pain interrupt remembrance. Even when speech was minimal, presence remained complete. Silence itself became a form of dhikr. Ibn Arabi further teaches that staying present within the trial allows the servant to be shaped by divine attributes rather than crushed by circumstances. Patience, humility, and gentleness do not appear after suffering ends. They are formed while it continues. Ayyub emerged not only healed, but transformed, because the trial had already done its inner work. Presence ensured that suffering refined, rather than hardened him. For the seeker, this lesson is demanding. It asks for faith that does not bargain, devotion that does not wait for comfort, and awareness that does not collapse under pressure. Ibn Arabi insists that divine closeness is not suspended during pain. It is often intensified, but only for the one who stays awake enough to perceive it. Ayyub perceived it because he did not flee inwardly when his outer world fell apart. In this light, relief is not the goal of patience. Intimacy is. The servant who remains present with God during hardship discovers a nearness that ease rarely offers. When the trial eventually lifts, that nearness does not disappear. Because it was never dependent on circumstances, Ayyub's story becomes a map for the soul, showing that the deepest meeting with God often happens not after the storm, but in the very heart of it.